nourishing in different kind of ways. And I feel like this is such a fitting maybe breakfast for somebody who likes to travel in human powered transport, that you like to also find food locally, as evidenced by your breakfast. For those of us who may not have heard about you, Susan, please tell us, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm an adventure paddler, a long distance like expedition paddler, and I've completed two through paddles, kind of like through hiking, where you do it from end to end in one fell swoop, of the Inside Passage from Washington State to different locations in Southeast Alaska. I've written books about those experiences and speak about them, mentor others to do similar expeditions, primarily younger women, which is really, really floating my boat, so to speak. And yeah, all of that wrapped together, I now have been referring to myself as an adventurepreneur. So one who makes their living off of adventure, so to speak. So I get to go off and have these amazing experiences and then share them with the world, whether it's through storytelling or imagery or mentoring, and all of that wrapped into one big package. So it's a thing, and I love it.
Beautiful. This analogy with through hiking that you just shared, it's, yeah, I hadn't thought about it before. Yeah, curious beyond just the obvious, which is, yes, when you're through hiking, maybe the PCT or the AT or something, equally epic. The contrast, obviously, you're in a boat and a water, and those people are on land. Any unobvious but maybe significant contrast between the two?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, and it's similar. Just like a long distance hiker will tackle a through hike of, like you said, the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail. We paddlers take on a similar challenge, but it's a radically different platform, and it's like, and I'm a paddler, not a hiker, and this is not to diss hiking at all. Long distance hikes would kill me, but it's like, I think a big difference is, for the most part, a hiker's trail is the same trail that the next hiker will experience. Right, the miles are pretty much the same. The distance is preordained, and forward progress is putting one foot in front of the other, and it's just worlds apart. Sea kayaking, or sea kayaking the Inside Passage, because there's literally thousands upon thousands of islands. Our days are governed by the tides and the currents, and our progress is dictated by the moods of the sea, and all of that. And we're carried along and are fighting against wind, waves, and currents. So yeah, I think that's the biggest difference, is that there's so many different choices and routes and ways to get lost to complete our objectives.
Yes, that makes so much sense, because most people, when they start a specific long hiking journey, they have a fair sense of the places they will walk through, the places they may camp,
Mm-hmm.
and most often, always, the trail is well marked. In your case, the options are, or the combinations are almost infinite.
Yes.
And oh my goodness, that's such a good contrast you pointed out. Can't wait to get into the actual trip
Yeah.
in a bit. But talking of contrast, here's another fun question that came to mind. When we were exchanging messages, you spoke about lecturing on large cruise ships,
Yes.
right? And these cruise ships, they glide over the same waters that
Really.
you spent months paddling alone in a small kayak. So so what is it like to speak on stage about, your, let's say, raw and intimate journey while you are on a floating hotel?
Literally, it's a floating city, and the line that I work for, they're massive. It's one of the bigger ships in the fleet. So like 4,000 passengers, if you can wrap your brain around that, plus 1,400 crew. And yeah, and never in a million years did I see myself doing this, right? When I set off on that first expedition, well, I never intended to write a book. And kayakers don't really like big ships. That's one of our biggest fears is getting run over by them. But, I just ended up kind of falling into this gig, and I love what I do when I'm on board. And it's mind blowing for the people that come to my presentations because I try in my slideshow to compare and contrast the difference in these radically different vessels. And you can see people laughing, like the juxtaposition. And I have this great photo that's like my title photo or title image of my kayaks on shore in the foreground, and this massive ship is going by in the background, and there's an iceberg and mountains, and it's a classic photo. But when you think about the difference in size and weight and carrying capacity and all of that between the two vessels, it's mind-boggling. So I go through this whole spiel. It's like these ships are longer than the Empire State Building is tall, right? For starters, and just the amount of food that they can carry, and I compare that with how my kayak can provision for up to 2 weeks. If I pack really, really conservatively. Yeah, I love inspiring a handful of people on these boats. And my whole takeaway message is that, they're traveling through this magical seascape. And I hope that my talk inspires them and motivates them to want to advocate for it like I do, to cherish it and protect it. And yeah, I think a handful of people really kind of get that takeaway message. The rest are just kind of like, well, where's the bar? Where's the casino? Where's the swimming pool? Where's the food court?
It's funny. Some of those cruise ships, like they have proper swimming pools, and I bet you could take your kayak up to the pool,
Right?
and you
Yeah.
could practice your role. You know, okay. I'm wondering how fully your audience grasps the adventures. Susan, yeah, I can tell you are a gifted storyteller, and you you convey the journeys you've been on through visuals, through your photography. Any question though, perhaps that may have come up recently that just took you by surprise?
Questions that the audience asks me?
Yeah, I'm curious if there was any like question that popped up and you're like, wow, this person is thinking of this in this way.
Oh, yeah, I've had like when we do the Q&A part, it's oftentimes the typical questions, like how did you do this, or how did you get water? How did you pee? Things like that. But what immediately comes to mind, it was a very recent cruise and my audiences are predominantly adults, right? And it's more or less an adult centered talk that I give. But there was this little girl sitting in the front, and it's a massive theater. It's like, 900 people. And she must have been 7 or 8, and she was with her mother, and she was right up front. And I glanced at her every now and then, and she was intent, like the whole time listening. And so when it's time to do the Q&A, and I thought this was very brave because as a little girl, I would have never done this. Someone ran a microphone through the venue because it was a huge space. And she raised her hand. And so he comes over and she takes the microphone, and she basically asked me how I dealt with my fears, in a kind of a roundabout
Wow.
way. Like it was so cute. Like how do you not be scared? Because she heard me talk about the bears and, being soaking wet and fighting off hypothermia and all this. And she's like, how do you not be scared? And it just touched me, coming from her having the courage to ask that question, and, getting that from my presentation. So that really warmed my heart.
Do you think you might have minted a future
Yeah, I
adventurer?
sure hope so. And basically what I told her was just like it's all about seeing yourself, positive visualization, but I didn't use that particular phrase because that would probably be too much for her. But just like seeing yourself at the finish line and you're warm and safe and dry. See that bear walking away, not being interested in you. Just picturing yourself as strong and courageous and just doing whatever that thing is that you want to do. And I think, I hope that's what her takeaway was.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just to help listeners orient and to actually even help me get back in the inside passage scheme of things,
Yeah.
what exactly is the inside passage, Susan?
Yeah, so the Inside Passage it's an extraordinary coastal route, and from a kayaker's perspective, it's a water trail, right? It's kind of like a hiking trail, but I always joke without the signposts and the poison ivy. And it starts down here in the Puget Sound, very close to where I live. So the Puget Sound is part of a broader area referred to as the Sailor's Sea, which is, and that's the Washington State component of the Inside Passage. So that's the more urban coastlines of Olympia, Tacoma, Seattle, and then the San Juan Islands, this massive archipelago, and lastly the Strait of Juan de Fuca, which is a massive body of water that separates the Olympic Peninsula from Vancouver Island, and then it flows out into the open Pacific. And from there, the Inside Passage crosses up into British Columbia, and it goes along the entire BC coastline for about 700 miles, give or take. And then it crosses into Alaska and goes for another uh, 450, 500 miles, all the way till you literally run out of ocean at the top of what's referred to as Lynn Canal. And there's a small community there known as Skagway. And when you paddle into Skagway, you feel like you've paddled into a scene out of Wild Wild West or Gunsmoke or something. It's just a bizarre little town. So that's the finish line. If you go from south to north. Some paddlers will go a little further west and finish their journey in Glacier Bay National Park, which is also a phenomenal part of the world, part of Southeast Alaska. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's the Inside Passage.
It absolutely is a world apart from a lot of the contiguous US. Maybe just to paint a more visual picture for listeners, what makes it so wild and beautiful, and why are paddlers drawn to it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, Alaska has a huge coastline, right?
Yes.
And so does the northeast of the US. So, what makes this particular stretch so alluring?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is the biodiversity, the wildlife that you're going to encounter. Just along the British Columbia coastline, there is an area known as the Great Bear Rainforest, which is the largest intact temperate rainforest on Earth. And it's a globally important ecosystem. It's a carbon oasis. And then when you jump into Alaska, it's very similar to the Tongass National Forest, which is another massive rainforest. And so you're going to encounter whales, orcas, humpback whales, gray whales, dolphins, otters, just every variety of seabirds that you could imagine. And of course, the bears. There's both coastal brown bears, which are a subspecies of the grizzly bear, and black bears. Did I mention icebergs? Once you get a little north of Petersburg, which is one of the southern ports in Southeast Alaska, you'll once you're north of the southernmost tidewater glacier, you're going to start to see icebergs, which was like a massive highlight for me, and makes for great photo compositions as well.
The inside passages can be this wide to accommodate a proper iceberg. In my naive let's say, naive imagination, I would think icebergs would exist in like large bodies of water. And when I think of, the inside passageways, I'm thinking like more constricted, maybe not too dissimilar to maybe just really wide rivers. Or am I totally off?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and a lot of people see it that way. But the Inside Passage is, well, it's also a major thoroughfare for the big ships. Like even though the cruise lines that I'm on, for the most part, they'll go more on the outside and the more open water, but they do come into these ports and they go up these narrow fjords, which is crazy, from the perspective of a kayaker. But for the most part, yeah, you're hugging as a paddler, you're hugging the shoreline. But for example, on my 2022 expedition, I had five 10 to 12-mile open ocean crossings where I had to cross these big,
Ah,
you look at a map and it looks all, it looks so tiny and narrow, but these channels can be anywhere from 5 to 12 miles wide, if not wider. And there's certain areas that are exposed to the open Pacific. So these are what we refer to as our crux moves, or there's areas where we're not in the so-called protected areas of the Inside Passage, but we're exposed to the open swell of the ocean and anything that it can and will dish out. But conversely, in the more constricted areas are tidal. They're tidal rapids. So you mentioned rivers, so they're very much like a saltwater river. But they're gonna, just to mess with you, they're gonna switch directions every 6 hours or so when the tide reverses itself. So there's an art to
wow.
transiting the the, the tidal rapids of certain areas of the Inside Passage. Very challenging.
Wow, yes. So dynamic,
Yeah.
so 3D in all kinds of ways. I mean, um, most people listening will, including myself, will never paddle 1,200 miles solo or even in the company of others. It just, yeah, it almost sounds mythical. I think many people here will understand, though, the life of, let's say, a backpacker on land, because many people backpack, way more people backpack, I'm guessing, than even get on a kayak. So, you know, I'm trying to help us understand how that feels like, because you look at something on a map, you read about it, those big numbers. Yeah, yeah. I don't know how many days, how many miles. People get like those numbers create fog. But maybe you can take us into the daily reality of a day while you were doing this expedition. Perhaps things like, where would you sleep? What did you eat? Like, what would be a good day or a bad day? How would that feel like out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one way, like just take breaking it down to one day, that's like mentally wrapping your brain around a multi-month expedition. Anybody, well, I shouldn't say anybody, but it's not that difficult with a certain skill set to paddle one day, right? You pack the boat, you click off some miles, you stop for lunch, take some photos, you find hopefully a suitable campsite because you are dealing with this extreme intertidal differences where setting up camp and breaking camp entails schlepping that gear in the kayak itself, sometimes the equivalent of up to 2 football fields over some pretty messy, uneven, and sometimes very dangerous terrain. But you find a suitable camp, hopefully, you set up that camp, catch up on your journal entries and just thousands of calories, and you climb into your tent and you have a good sleep, and then you get up in the morning, reverse everything, and then repeat. So if you can do that one day, it's the mental game of breaking it down into bite-sized chunks. And much like I did for the whole expedition, it's too overwhelming to look at the whole map, the whole chart of the Inside Passage. But if you break it down, like most paddlers do, uh, via the resupply ports. So for me, there were 7 sections that were structured around my 6 ports of call. So these were towns that I would paddle into to retrieve my supplies that were mailed ahead to those towns. And that makes it much more manageable. And then these ports become kind of like a milestone for the next section. You get to get a roof over your head and hopefully a pillow under your head, a shower, ingest as many calories as you possibly can,
Yeah.
socialize a little bit, right? That's the big part of it, is just eating your
Yeah,
way
yeah,
through these
yeah.
towns, and then you set off on the next leg of the adventure. So
For sure. You describe, like, let's say, a day that you would want to happen, like a day which would start like this, which would have a bunch of paddling and then camping and eating. So that is perhaps a day on script.
yes.
So here's a funny question. So if you think back, roughly, like, out of, let's say, in your last crossing, how many days do you think were just like the one you described versus the ones where things went off script?
Yeah.
Things went awry for all kinds of
hmm
reasons.
Yeah, and Mother Nature, for the most part, Mother Ocean is going to dictate that. There were days where I had plotted out on my chart, I'm okay, this is a 20-mile a day, which was pretty typical for me, 20 to 25 miles a day. But I set off, and within a couple miles, it's like, no. Like the wind kicked up, the sea state kicks up, it's a headwind, you just can't even paddle against it anymore. It just makes no sense. So you turn around. You either go back to where you were or you hack out, which typically this happened probably 15 to 20% of the time, where you're hacking out a pretty miserable campsite, but you are so thankful just to get off the water. Yeah. And then also bears, right? That is a big, you talk to any inside passage paddler, and one of their biggest fears is encountering bears in camp. And there was one day where I was actually going to go around this headland and out into the exposed Pacific. And conditions seemed okay at the time, but once I got around the corner, it was the same kind of thing. Like, just going to go with my intuition on this one, which has always been, pretty good. And so I turned around and I landed on this small island that it actually had camped on in previous expeditions. Other paddlers had camped there. We all know that bears can swim, but I really wasn't thinking of bears at this time. And it's still early in the day, and I hadn't set up camp yet, fortunately. And I had just paddled a couple of miles, and a bear, a mama bear and a cub, show up, like just come galloping out of the forest, and came to a screeching halt within, maybe 30 feet of me. They were that close. And I didn't have my protection on me. My bear spray was in the kayak, which was stashed behind a log. I had food in my hand. It was lunchtime. I had food
Wow.
in my hand. And I've just shocked or scared a mom with a cub. You couldn't be in a more dangerous situation. So that idyllic little island was very short lived. Obviously, I survived the encounter. She wasn't aggressive. She ran back into the woods after I went ballistic. And I packed up that boat so fast, paddled back down this channel. I had come up earlier that day where I discovered this little fording platform. It's where fishermen sort their nets. It was just in the middle of this narrow channel, and there were a couple of fishing boats nearby. And I explained what happened and asked if I could, sleep on that float, because there was no way I was sleeping on land that night, because they were so close. And they said, "Yeah, of course, you'll be safe here." So that was a plan B that, worked out to my advantage. But it there's just there's there's no known outcome, and that's what makes it an adventure, right? Otherwise, we could all just go to Disneyland.
30 feet in front of Mama Bear and her cub. When it comes to, yeah, people imagining like animal encounters
Mhm.
of the dangerous kind, it doesn't sort of get more scary than that.
Yeah.
You did not have your base spray on you. Did you practice any safety maneuvers? I feel like every time you go Yeah, every time you do some research on like fending off wild animals, you hear something different. Should I run downwind? Should I make myself bigger? Should I turn away or should I stare down? Like what
Right.
what is actually effective?
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, it happens so quickly. These encounters always happen so quickly. You're not expecting them. And she was so close, and I just remember my eyes locking on her hump, right? And that's when you say, oh shit, this is a grizzly. This is a grizzly bear. And I could see the gradations in her fur, like going from like this beautiful, almost coppery brown to a darker black, and then down to the claws, like these massive claws, and then the little cub right behind her. But you know, it took my brain a few seconds to calibrate like what was happening because I hear the galloping first and then all of a sudden she's in front of me and I'm like literally 2 or 3 seconds that seemed like an eternity. And did I do the right thing? I didn't have my bear spray on me, and I all of a sudden I had like Michael Jordan jumping abilities. I just jumped on this log like Superwoman, and I just started yelling and screaming and waving my hands. Now, she wasn't being aggressive. If she was being aggressive, then what I've researched and people I've talked to is that you make yourself small, right? You're not a threat. Just keep on moving. But she wasn't being aggressive. She was just right there. And so I just helped her know that, I'm here, I'm human, I'm not a bear, I'm human, and I'm not really a danger to you, but just like we're not jiving, just go away. And I was very lucky that's what happened. And when I paddled into a small port a few days later and I talked to some hunters, fishermen, people that have lived in these waters, all their lives and asked them if I did the right thing. And they were like, well, you're here to talk about it.
Yeah.
I guess I did the right thing, but it was really just, it wasn't my time. It wasn't my turn. And I was just incredibly fortunate that she wasn't being aggressive. So,
Susan, I find this contrast, you know, so stark between that through hiking one example and doing a long kayak trip where you could have the longest, roughest of days as you're through hiking. You know, let's say you got dehydrated, sunburned, you hiked a lot more miles than you thought you wanted to. You got altitude sickness in the process. But more often than not, you know where you're going to camp and you know that you're going to get there. Yes, it's going to be a bit of work to set up your tent and maybe you don't have enough warm clothes, but you know roughly where you will sleep.
yes.
But in your case, there were so many days where you could not reliably make camp because of so many of these multi-dimensional issues.
Wild cards.
You talked about wild cards, you talked about the animals, you actually also talked about the tides. And I think most of us, when you think about tides, honestly, like the picture that comes to mind is you're at the beach and you spent a long day out there and you see the water line change.
Yes.
Maybe when you got there at one point, you see this one a high line mark, and then but I think people don't realize the severity
Hmm.
of the swings. Can you talk about that for a moment and how that impacts your journey?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's another big difference between backpackers pitching camp and a kayaker, at least on the Inside Passage. If you're backpacking, I know there's specific areas on trails where you are to camp and can't camp, but you pretty much plop your backpack down and pitch your tent. And yeah, it's worlds apart up here because, well, if you think of like the coastlines, like in Florida or down on the Baja, the Sea of Cortez, they have there's a tide, but it's like 3 to 6 inches, which is almost laughable, right? It's just a little lapping in and lapping out. And on the Inside Passage, because of the topography and the steepness in some areas in these fjords, and also even the more shallower bays, It's like a tidal elevator, and it can be anywhere from 18 up to, I think the maximum that I've experienced was about 24 feet of this vertical
Wow.
elevator. Yeah. So in areas that are more shallow, yeah, it's like you wake up in the morning, unzip your tent where you've paddled in on high tide, and it's kind of the easy button, right? You don't have too far to go. You can tell from the rack line, like the debris line that the previous high tide had left. And you know if it's the tide is increasing each night or if it's decreasing. The GPS will tell you that too with today's technology. But so you're pretty well assured that it's not going to flood you. But then in the morning, you unzip your tent and it's low tide. And it's just like, who pulled the plug on the bathtub, right? And sometimes you can't just wait 6 hours for it to come in. You have to get on the water and beat the wind before it comes up in the afternoon, or catch a tidal rapid, whatever the case may be. And then conversely, in some of these fjords, and it's the opening chapter in my book. It's almost every paddler's nemesis. This place called Grenville Channel, which is the central coast of British Columbia, and extreme tidal differences, very few places to come ashore, much less camp. There were a couple of nights where my tent site was flooded, and I knew that was going to happen. I couldn't get to higher ground. It's just cliffs and impenetrable forest behind me. So you just kind of have to deal with it. You let the tide come in, and I literally was holding my tent up, waiting for the tide to finish the top end of its cycle, and then just almost right on cue, according to my GPS, it reversed and it went back out to sea. And then I could put the tent back up and at least get a couple hours of sleep. So yeah, it's a tremendous amount of work. And I often joke that paddling is the easy part. It's the land-based chores where that wears you down, schlepping that gear. It's a process of an hour, 2 hours, the whole thing, packing up camp. And from the moment I unzip my tent door in the morning to the moment that I'm taking my first strokes is typically an hour and a half to 2 hours. That's eating breakfast, that's packing the boat. It depends on the intertidal range. All of that has to factor in. And then once my butt is in the cockpit and I take my first stroke, I'm like, finally, I get to paddle. And the injuries, most of the injuries are going to occur on land too, right? Twisting an ankle, we have to schlep that boat, we have to huck it up on our shoulder or drag it. And empty, they weigh about 50 pounds, give or take. So yeah, that's a lot of energy expended, just the intrinsic nature of the land-based stuff.
I'm guessing for most people who think that, kayaking is an upper body sport,
Mm.
you have to maybe do some overnight kayaking with all the work that's needed with what you talked about. And again, this is not just like a little day kayak that you go out for a paddle, you come back. Your kayak is loaded up
Hmm.
with all your survival
Yes, all your gear.
gear, all your gear and toolkit. And yes, you have written this beautiful book. You've written many books. The one that I'm loving is Inside. I think maybe your first book.
Yes,
And you also talk about, maybe I don't know if it was miscalculation or something else, but like going to sleep and then maybe coming to waking up because there's water in your tent,
under my tent. Yes, that's
under your
Grenville
tent, right?
Channel. Yeah,
Yes, yes. Yeah, how, and on conversely, this can happen as well. Like you make landfall, you pitch your tent up, and you think that you know in the morning you can pack up and paddle away, but the tide maybe recedes
yes,
to to much further out than expected, which means that now you have to drag your vessel
yes.
through this submerged surface
Hmm.
full of all kinds of hazards, likely, plus all the work in being able to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. And like certain areas, I would drag the kayak. I had a professional keel strip installed, fiberglass onto the bottom. It's about, 3 inches wide, and maybe an eighth inch thick. And it's from bow to stern. And just to protect it, give it a little more structural integrity. But you can really damage the kayak, and I have by dragging it. So what you do, like on the first trip, I was on the first expedition that book is about, I was only 49 years young. I thought I was old then. I was in my prime. But back then, I could hook the kayak up on my shoulder and just very carefully, it's like having this 50-pound seesaw on your shoulder, and then you're navigating, you're trying to watch your feet, but you can't really see your feet, and you have your paddle in your other hand, and you're trying to navigate whatever 50, 100 yards, sometimes 200 yards down to the water's edge. And then you have to go back and make multiple trips with all of the gear bags, all the waterproof gear bags. But what we do sometimes is you get really creative with beach rollers, so pieces of driftwood. That's the first thing I do when I land, when I know this is going to be an issue the next morning when I have to launch, is I look for pieces that are about the size of my arm, and I'll stash those above the high tide line. And then you can just create this rolling system where you roll your kayak. You have 3 or 4 of them lined up, and then you roll the kayak and get the stern to the last log, and then you take all the logs and you run and you put them in front of the kayak, and you repeat until you're to the water's edge. That can take anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes just for that part of the
Wow.
packing, the packing up and taking your first strokes. So it's all part of the process though. And some days are, like I said, the easy button. Some days are just like, oh, I needed this, thank you. There's not a big title exchange because of, what the moon, where the phase of the moon is at the time, or it's just the topography. It's not that big of a deal. So every once in a while, you just like, oh, thank you, thank you.
Yes, bring all your kayaking knowledge, bring your knowledge of like the ocean and the environment, but also maybe bring your best improvisation game,
Yeah.
because there's probably only so much you can learn in the classroom. Like once you're actually in that trip,
Mhm.
you are learning and executing
Yeah. Good.
on the fly.
That's what I love about it, because it's, kayaking really requires problem solving skills on the fly, and just staying power and tenacity, and stubbornness, and all of that, which I've got all that in spades, the stubbornness, the tenacity.
You know, uh, people listening, they might be like, "Oh my gosh, this is, all these hazards, bears, all these risks." But I think on the flip side, there there is so much magic, and I'm guessing, yeah, there were probably many moments of stillness,
Mhm.
of wonder
Yes,
that cracked you open.
absolutely.
The kind that maybe make you forget all the hardship.
Hmm.
Can you maybe take us through maybe a moment or two where that happened for you?
Yeah, yeah, many, many moments like that. and the whole solo aspect too. There's a lot of reasons that I go solo, but one of the biggest reasons is that what I refer to as this heightened awareness that comes from being, just out there, and being 100% reliable on my own skills and abilities. And it's just like this heady sense of freedom, and the problem solving, and just all of that, and how the experience is all mine, and no one else's. I can go at my own pace. I can paddle as many miles as I want to. Yeah, and so there was this time, there's so many experiences, but what immediately comes to mind was on the 2022 expedition. Of course, it was benign conditions. I was in this narrow channel. It was just absolutely magical. It's just the magic carpet ride part of the journey, where I often say in my slideshows that like 80% of my journeys are these magic carpet rides. And then the other 20-30%, not so much. Just like, it's not in the brochure. I want my money back, right? But I was just in this magical world. There were loons that were calling each other, like this eerie is the wrong word, just this magical sound that they make. And I was just floating and listening
Sorry. What are did you say
Loons,
loons?
yeah, Loons. They're a water bird, and they have this beautiful song when they communicate with each other, and they're very common up in Southeast Alaska. And I just was floating and drifting and listening, and there were some whales in the distance that were spouting. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them. And I was like, this is why I've come. The experiences like this where you're so tuned into yourself and you're disconnected from the hectic wired world out there, and you're connected with yourself and the ocean and nature and all of that. It's just like that's the feeling that I want to hold on to, long after I've completed the journey.
And Susan, again, like that sounds beautiful. When a lot of people think of Alaska, or at least the wildlife, right? So the bears for sure, but then also those huge leviathans in the ocean. Many years ago, I did a trip to Alaska, kind of a classic like tourist trip. I actually did some kayaking as well,
Nice.
down by Homer, I think. But then we did this this day long cruise and off seaward, and we were lucky to see a couple of humpbacks,
Nice.
and even from like let's say the safety and the height of a big rig, those things take your breath away.
They're massive.
So how did it feel the first time one of those guys decided to breach
The first
in front of
time,
you?
it was terrifying. It's not terrifying anymore, but the first time I was paddling with one of my mentors. He has a big voice in the narrative of Inside, my first book. And so I was pretty new to all of this ocean paddling. So I was following him. We were along an open rocky coastline, and he'd encountered many whales by that point in his paddling life. So it's no big thing to him. But the ocean was kind of tumultuous. It was a little foggy, rocky, rolly, and I'm just trying to stay close to him and trying to stay upright. And this massive, I think it was a gray whale, surfaced very close, very close. I could have almost reached out and touched it with my paddle. And he was just like taking pictures and going up and down on this, what I refer to as this nautical roller coaster, just so excited. And I screamed. I literally screamed at the top of my lungs. And he's just like, what's the matter? I was just like, whale, whale. And he just
Wow.
reassured me over time, too, and more experiences that they are aware of your presence. They're just gentle giants. They're just doing their whale thing. And sure, there's the one in a million chance that you could have this errant flip of a tail and there you go into the water. But yeah, they're just busy feeding for the most part. And there were other encounters where I had them go like under my kayak, and then on the other side they would roll over, and I'd look right into their eyeballs, like their massive eyeballs, and they're like the biggest ones I've seen are 35 feet long, like 30, I think 30,000 tons, something like that. They're just massive. And then the killer whales, the orcas, they're much smaller, but they're fast and unpredictable, and they have teeth. So the first time I saw their dorsal fins are like 6 feet tall, and coming right at you, and you're in this 21-inch wide kayak, and their movements are very erratic, and then they dive, and you have no clue where they are and where they're going to come up. That's a bit nerve wracking. But over the years, I've been doing this for, gosh, I'm dating myself here. Started in college, which would be the late 80s, early 90s. So my gosh, over 4 decades. But just, now it's just a treat, and you really hope that you're going to have a
Sure.
whale encounter. But still, especially when the conditions are rough, you don't want them to get too close. It's just like that's good enough. Just go do your whale thing over there. I'll take a photo.
Well, these large, I mean, let's say colossal creatures, they are highly intelligent.
Yes.
And it seems that they're also very self-aware of themselves and their presence. Like they're not clumsy, right? Like they know exactly where their body is
Yes.
in relation to others in the sea around them. Yes, I mean, yeah, I mean, for all the, we're surrounded by, most of us, by technology, by urbanization, but nature is so vital. Like it only takes one encounter or one, I shouldn't even use the word encounter, maybe just a sighting. Even just a single sighting can like really transform how we think about our planet. And also, you write about that beautifully. I also was curious about this other aspect of the kind of, let's say, living beings you meet on these trips, humans,
Hmm.
right? So you are doing this trip solo, but you are not always alone, right? You meet other people on the trip, sometimes on kayaks, and often when you are making visits to ports to restock and, like you said, eat your way through the stop. Particularly, I'm curious. Do you think that people treat solo travelers, especially solo women, differently? I ask this because I'm somewhat familiar with the experience of being, let's say, a solo male traveler,
Hmm.
and sometimes, let's say, a solo brown guy. Often in like places where there are not too many people of my background.
Hmm.
And I'm curious, like, how does your any reflections on like how you get treated, how do you get welcomed given who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, I think you're right about being the solo female traveler. I've had, especially on the second journey, because I was more open to it, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But people just they want to help. They especially being an older. I was 62, 61 no 61 when I did the most recent expedition, and so I think people are taken by, they have maybe a sense of what it takes to pull something of this nature off. And I'm by myself. I've covered, really long distances. The weather is really snotty and they want to help me. They want to put a roof over my head or a pillow under, and they want to feed me. Everybody wants to feed you or give you a cold beer, whatever the situation is. But I think, like, especially on the first journey, that was my first big expedition alone. And I think I just wanted to see if I could pull it off. I just wanted to do it. And I wasn't really that open to having these encounters in ports. And I'm a classic introvert. Like my knee jerk reaction, I'm on a little island and I see a boat go by, is to hide, or at least it was back then. And so I wasn't open to these experiences and these encounters. And I would come into a port and I would just get a motel room. I would splurge, or a hostel if there was one. And then I would just keep to myself. But as I approached these communities, my biggest fear was that of men with ill intentions. When you're out in the wild, yeah, there's possible bears and whatnot. But as you get closer to communities, you start seeing signs of humanity. And that's, like toilet paper in the woods and leaving garbage, which is going to bring the bears in. Or you see the occasional small boat come and land, and then you're concerned, like, oh my God, is this person going to come and slit my throat? Or, your mind can really get carried away. And there were a few instances where I just went with my intuition and left that situation. But fast forwarding to the 2022 expedition, one thing that I vowed I was going to do differently was I was going to do slower. I was going to paddle a little slower and not do these crazy marathon distances day after day after day, because my body just couldn't handle it. I had some long days, but Mother Nature dictated that. But that I was going to be open to, when I come into these ports or where there were people, just open to whatever experience and not be my introverted self. And the title of my talk that I give on these cruise ships is entitled Seeking Synchronicity. Like when you open yourself up to these opportunities, the magic that happens was just, it just happened over and over and over again. The people that I met and the stories that came from those people. Yeah, it was just, it was like a whole different type of journey for me.
Susan, that is profound. And the title of your talk, that hits deep, seeking synchronicity.
Mhm.
And I think there's something powerful here for us, which is, yeah, maybe you can maybe elaborate on this a little bit, on what is it that you mean by being open,
Yeah,
by being receptive, and what does that bring?
yeah. Well, it's just like first of all, like synchronicity. It's just like these moments in our lives that seem random or coincidental, whether they're just our everyday lives or out on a big journey. They're just they're meant. Everything happens for a reason, right? Is was kind of the mentality going into this, that and that's exactly what synchronicity is. These things that seem random or coincidental are actually all tied together, right? And we're all tied together. Everything is connected, and everything happens at a certain time and a certain place for a specific reason. You know, in most cases. So that was the sound bite that I was going with, and just opening myself up to that. So backing up a little bit, a big impetus for this second expedition was to follow in the paddle strokes of my hero, one of my biggest inspirations. Her name was Audrey Sutherland. And talk about an ageless athlete. She had kayaked tens of thousands of miles, almost always solo, and she did it in an inflatable kayak, much slower than a hard shell. And she did it in her 60s, 70s, and well into her 80s. So she redefined for
Wow.
me, you know, what it means to grow old and to stay active and keep doing these seafaring expeditions. And when I reread for like the fifth time her third and last book, Paddling North, which tells the story of her earliest kayak expeditions in Alaska in the early 80s, that's when I decided that the world needs to know more about this woman. And like she was this unspoken legend. And I defiantly closed the pages of that book and I said, I'm going to recreate her route and I'm going to paddle to Sitka, Alaska. So little off the main path of the traditional inside passage. So that's what I did. I basically curated this experience of recreating her experience. And that's the story that I tell. And so before I came into a lot of these ports, I knew about people that remembered her, that invited me in, that I would interview. And they had amazing memories of when Audrey came through, you know, decades earlier. And so that was a big part of the synchronicity in opening myself up to these experiences, and you know, having these transcripts of all these people that I talked to. And now I'm working on weaving all of that into this new book about the more recent expedition of, you know, recreating her route and essentially feeling the essence of her along the way, camping on some of the same beaches, following the same coastline. There's hot springs along the way. I soaked in some of the same hot springs. She has camp recipes in her book. I recreated as close as I could her own, you know, dehydrated, rehydrated meals along the way. So, you know, the whole Audrey Sutherland package. So that was a huge project, and it just opened up, you know, so many doors for me.
Susan, you didn't just you just didn't read about Audrey's experience. You went and took this step, this, shall I say, big step, in reliving that experience. Any advice for the rest of us on how can we bring more synchronicity into our lives?
How can you bring more synchronicity into your life? I think that the biggest first step is just to be open to it, right? Just for me, that was huge. Just not to go with my own personal knee jerk reaction of you know, disappearing, like making myself small and quiet, which is a self-defeating coping mechanism learned from a very scary childhood. And I feel like I've worked through that over the years with all the work that I've done, whether it's aqua therapy, being on the water, or seeing a professional therapist. But it's still sometimes my go-to reaction. So that's the biggest takeaway. It's just open yourself up to that. So that's the biggest takeaway. It's just open yourself up. What's trust in yourself, trust in the process. Does that make sense?
I'm gonna, yeah, no, I'm gonna poke this a little bit deeper,
Yeah.
which is, which is, you know, as we go live our lives on a daily basis, can you illustrate what would that be to open ourselves?
On a daily basis, off of an expedition, just day to day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just most people here are not gonna paddle 1,200 miles, but I think we could all benefit from this bit of wisdom on being able to be open to these things.
That is a good question. I'm struggling with the answer. Other than just the trust in trusting in the process and where that might take you, where that
Sure,
where that might take others who have also crossed your path. Others that
sure.
you could inspire. They're going to inspire you. You can inspire them, and that in turn, it's like this domino effect, right? Yeah.
Susan, you went and did this trip again the second time, and you already spoke of this huge impetus. And you did that at the age of 49 the first time, and you said you were, in retrospect, you were peaking. And now you did that at
Yeah.
61. So I have, a couple of like through lines to go through here. The first is, what did you notice about yourself, both physically and maybe even deeper?
On the second trip. Um,
Yes,
yeah, I would always joke, it was 12 years later, and hopefully I was 12 years wiser. I definitely felt I had more experience under my belt, more staying power, but also 12 years slower. And once I was on the water, because that is just what I am wired to do. I just have those, what they call them, slow twitch muscle fibers, right? It's like the tortoise and the hare. I've never been fast at anything. I sucked at all the sports in school, all of that. But once I got into like these endurance things, it's like, this is what I can do. But it just, I was slower on land. Like once I got on the water, I was for the most part okay. I was going to cap it at about 20 to 22 miles and versus 26 to 30. But on land, I noticed that I was at least much more cognizant of my body English, right? Just because that's where like I said, that's where you're going to hurt yourself. Especially there's a lot of twisting and lifting, and that's where you're going to, blow out your back, or you're going to twist, an ankle or something. And there's, help can be a long ways away out there. So that was a big difference, just much more intentional on land. I noticed when I unzipped that tent in the morning, I wasn't just jumping out of it. It was just like, oh yeah, this is a whole ball of wax. I mean, more aches and pains and all of that. And so just embracing that and spending a little bit more time on land, not feeling quite so rushed to get on the water. Although, the winds do pick up in the afternoon. So there's always this cognitive dissonance of wanting to get going and also embrace the time on land. Not easy to do.
yes, yes. Well, 12 years in,
Mm-hmm.
you learned so many things the first time around. I'm curious if there were maybe a couple of lessons from the first trip that that
Yeah.
helped you succeed this time.
Yeah, the biggest lesson I think was just acceptance, right? Just accept. I had to accept the weather. I had to accept the sea state. I had to accept the camp that I might have chosen, the possible presence of bears. I had to accept that everything was wet, and I still had a lot of a lot of miles to paddle. And then also accept that, I've got the skill set, under my belt. I've got all the best gear. I've got the skills. I've got the training. I've got the experience. So with my own, that it's not built-in courage. It's like it's earned courage and trust that,
Mm.
I'm gonna. It's like that little girl, what she was asking, who sat in the front of the audience, like, how did you not be fearful? And it's just trusting in my judgment, my problem solving skills, and that I'm going to be okay. That I visualize myself at the so-called finish line, my bow swimming up on shore, and yeah, that I've pulled off another successful expedition. That was a big lesson for me, just believing in myself.
Yeah. And maybe, yeah, on a lighter note, believing that, these whales next to you are not going to try to flip you or eat you. And then also likely some lessons on how to find the right camp,
And
and trusting that, yes, if the tide brought you in, it will also pull you back
yeah,
again if you have the patience to wait for it.
patience. That's a huge lesson, right? So many of us are lacking, and I think for me, patience is something I've always been challenged with. So that's I think I gleaned a lot of patience from the second expedition.
Yeah.
Older and wiser.
I mean, it would be amazing to have the patience of, like, you know, our middle years
Mhm.
be available in our youth.
Say again?
That to have the patience of our middle years,
Yes.
the patience and the experience and the lessons, and have those be available in our youth.
Mm,
That would
wouldn't that
be,
be nice?
anyway. Wouldn't that be nice? Exactly. One other thing I wanted to explore with you, you you bring this really unique perspective. Those of us who are fortunate and skilled, if I add, to do these big expeditions. You might go and climb this, some big Himalayan peak once, right? You might go and do some other type of activity once again.
Mhm.
Most people who will kayak the Inside Passage will likely not repeat it. But you have this really unique vantage point. You went and did it once, and you went back
Mm.
and did it again. And, we live in this period acknowledged as a period of hastened climate change. And people will read about it, but most of us will never, at least in the West, let's say, will never experience the immediate impact. The ecosystems that you paddle through, rich in biodiversity,
Yes.
but also very fragile.
Absolutely. Yes.
So, what changes did you notice, Susan, in the land or the water that felt off?
Yeah, that was another, like, the whole environmental part of it, and wanting to raise awareness, for these fragile marine ecosystems that I was paddling through, was the second big impetus for the second trip. In addition to Audrey wanting to recreate her route and portray her as not only this legend, this amazing woman that she was, and this legend she came to be. I also, the second time around, I wanted it to be more than just me, in a kayak plying the coastline of Western North America. And so I wanted to give back to the Inside Passage. And I mentioned the Great Bear Rainforest, which, I said is the largest intact temperate rainforest on Earth. And on that first trip, I learned about a conservation organization known as Pacific Wild. And it's a small nonprofit. And the couple that started this um, a little over a decade ago pretty much dedicated their lives to protecting and advocating for the Great Bear Rainforest. And I've been supporting their work and following their work for quite some time by that point. And so I reached out to them and we had this conversation of how we could possibly collaborate and bring, make my expedition serve as a platform of sorts to raise awareness for the work that they do, the pivotal work they do for the Great Bear Rainforest. So it ended up being this amazing collaboration where and it was just for that section. So it was about, I think it was about 250 miles of the 1,200-mile route where I'm paddling along this coastline, the Great Bear Rainforest. So they set me up with a portable, about the size of an iPad, a connectivity device, so that every day I could send them data. I could send them short videos. I could send them photos, journal entries, voice memos, and just of my experience being the eyes, ears, and voice of the Great Bear Rainforest and what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling. So I would document trash, single-use plastic, derelict fishing gear, things like that being washed up on the beaches. Fish farms, if I saw trawlers out there that literally rake the bottom of our oceans, devoid, of all biodiversity down there, just tragic things like that. So I was documenting all this, and what they in turn did was create this dynamic story map that brought my journey to life while it was underway. So, story maps they're essentially websites, interactive websites where people can follow along in real time as I'm working my way up, this ecosystem. And so the Pacific Wild team, they would put maps in there, of course. They would have the videos and photos that I submitted and whatever I'm sending them. And then they would incorporate all the scientific components into it. So they're educating people about these systems as these fragile areas as I'm paddling through them and just raising awareness. Also was a fundraising effort. We raised $40,000 and that was all funneled back into Pacific Wild's marine protection campaign. So that was a huge part of the journey, and it just raised my own awareness. Like I'm, keyed into like seeing plastic washed up on the beaches and just things like that. That was the biggest difference that I noticed between the two expeditions was just more things that didn't belong. Right, that's what your
Oh
eyes
wow.
picks up on. You see color, and it's a washed up buoy or some sort of plastic or something like that. Yeah. And
That is,
oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, no, I was saying I am a little bit surprised by that, um, by the impact of that observation. I thought the primary observations might be that maybe you saw less wildlife, maybe you saw less ice and snow cover.
That for sure. Yeah. The glaciers obviously are receding. Yeah. So less ice, um, more people, more garbage. Yeah. More degradation. Yeah.
And I would also think that, the Alaskan waters, I mean, they're such a heritage.
Hmm.
And, whatever we do with our garbage and our plastic, we would try to keep them off our national parks
Hmm.
and again, I would think that we would not see them over there. We would see them maybe, in uh, other parts of the ocean where we have created landfills.
Hmm.
But maybe what you're also pointing out is that garbage has a way of appearing when you don't want it to appear, and plastic in particular, I think it's kind of indestructible.
It's forever. Yeah. When you think about it, every
Yeah.
piece of plastic that's ever been made is, it's going to be here forever.
Susan, you quote this idea that we protect what we love,
Yes.
and you say that we love what we understand.
Hmm.
And I come back to like, how can we make this relatable to the everyday person? So how do the rest of us, how can we build that connection and appreciation of nature?
I think it's simply spending time in it, right? And immersing yourself in it. And it kind of circles back to one of your first questions about the cruise ships, and like these thousands of people and me inspiring just a handful. And I think that what you were quoting, how do I say it? You only conserve what you love and you only love what you understand. And I think that's my job right now. Maybe that's why I put on this earth is it's my job to help people understand, like, why and how and all of that, why these areas are fragile and what we can do to to protect them and to at least raise awareness and tell people. And I think it's just by spending time in nature, right? You're just immediately, not everybody, but most people just feel this connection with it, and they want to just by virtue of that feeling connected and disconnected from everything else, that they want to cherish and protect it. At least that's my hope. And I think even if I'm just out of those 4,000 people on those ships, even if it's just a handful that get that takeaway message, then I've done my job. So, and then for everybody else, for the runners and the hikers and the climbers and the surfers and the kayakers, I think we're more tuned into that sort of thing anyway. And yeah, it's just spreading the word, spreading the love.
And yeah, I mean, I can agree more, but I think maybe to take that even further, I feel like one doesn't have to be an outdoor athlete.
No, not at all.
And these large large cruise ships, sure, I mean, to some degree, their criticism is valid, yes, that they do produce a lot of pollution. I believe though that if they allow more of us access to the wild and the wonderful, I mean,
Mhm.
you don't have to be in a kayak to be riveted by the sight of you know an orca playing with their pod.
Mhm.
And to that quote, like yeah, I mean, we we will not love what we understand until we actually appreciate it as well.
Bingo. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter like how you experience nature.
Mhm.
Like if you just get the chance to experience it, at some point
Mhm.
you will want to protect it.
Exactly. Yeah. And it doesn't matter, like with the inside passage or anywheres, really, it doesn't matter how you get there. What matters is that you fall in love with it, and you want.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how you get there, but the fact that you got there.
Exactly.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
you're gonna take your memories back with you. Amazing, Susan. Shifting gears a little bit, going a little bit into your origins,
Into my, I'm sorry.
into your origins,
Or, okay. Yes.
into and you you're such a good you're such a gifted storyteller, but you're also willing to be just candid and vulnerable about your story, and your opening chapters bring out your journey so vividly in your book. And so um you know you have done some of these incredible kayak trips, but you talked about how your father's or your family's trauma created this hard boundary for your family, and you talk about how you and your siblings were strictly forbidden
Mhm.
to even go near the water.
Yes, yes.
So simple but obvious question: how did you move from being banned from
Sure.
the shoreline to building your life around it?
Yeah, well, it was so I had an older brother who's about 9 years older than me. And that was the first um, discrepancy that I noticed that made me just such a defiant little shit. Because I was like, my parents didn't encourage, like, you went to school to learn, right? And they didn't really encourage, like, developing into this, strong, capable woman, and they discouraged sports, really. Like, I grew up on a 500-acre farm, which that encouraged, like, just me. I was given the ability to wander and get lost and that sort of thing. But as far as like developing any athleticism in sports, they just discouraged that, and they actually forbid me to stay after school to go after to do some of the track and cross country and basketball and all of that, which I did anyway. I was terrible at everything. But so when I was probably close to 4, and my 5-year-old cousin drowned in a nearby river. So that's why I was forbidden to go near water. And I think my parents just didn't want me to suffer from the same demise. But I always joke, like, what happens when you tell a child not to do something, right? It was like as if from that point forward, I was drawn to water. I don't know if it was because I wanted to defy them, but it was just in my nature. I just was enamored by the creeks and the ponds that flowed through that 500-acre farm. And so when my parents weren't looking, where do you think I went? I went right to those bodies of water and played. I bring my little toy boats and watched them tumble down the creeks. I had a little raft that I stashed below one of the ponds there, and I would always go out and fish, and I had a little fishing rod, and yeah, it was like this magnetic force. And so when I was out of the house, I first thing I did in college was I got involved with crazy adrenaline pumping whitewater rafting and then whitewater kayaking. And
Wow.
from there there was just no stopping me. And it was when I eventually discovered the longer, sleeker sea kayaks and realized that, hey, these vessels have watertight hatches where you can put all of your gear and disappear for days, weeks, and what would eventually become, for me, months at a time. I mean, that was the big gear changer, or game changer, sorry. But I think it just goes back to my personality. Is I'm just very stubborn and very defiant. And I think that was just kind of curated by how my parents, they told me, "Yeah, you're a girl." That was the other thing that really pissed me off. I watched my older brother and all my male cousins. They could do anything. They would go off on these bike rides, and then it became mini bikes and snowmobiles, and whatever they would do, they could do it. It was okay, but I couldn't do it because I was a girl. And
Wow.
well, I think that molded me into, who I am now.
So classic.
Right?
Yeah, you keep somebody from like getting into the cookie jar on the top
Yeah.
shelf, and that's the very first thing that they will get into.
Mhm.
I understand your father is no longer with us,
Correct.
but if he knows what you have accomplished and the life you have built around the ocean, would he be proud of you?
Hmm. I think on some levels, yeah. Like my mother was still alive when I did the first trip, but I didn't tell her until after the fact. I didn't. She had all kinds of health problems, and I just was afraid it was going to really stress her out. But I told her when I returned, and but she just, I don't think she ever really got it. She just thought I went on this kayak trip. She didn't, and I didn't really explain it to her. And of course, I didn't. Um, she never read the book because, as you've seen, I did a fair bit of, family disclosure in there that she wouldn't want to read. And so, yeah, she didn't get it, but would my father have? Because he was in the army, and he spent a lot of time on ships, and so I think he would kind of get that seafaring part of it and what that
Mm.
entailed. Yeah, that's a one question that no one has ever asked me before. I love it.
And I'm also curious, this drive that you have, and this maybe chutzpah, to go out and chase these audacious goals. I'm also wondering if, again, like, you've had, by all accounts, a tough childhood, and obviously you know you had the resilience. There probably a couple of ways that could have gone. Either you would never go to the water and never do these things, or maybe the best outcome, which is this life you have built. And I'm wondering, do you think that that has actually also been a motivator that has that keeps pushing you to achieve these things? Maybe because you didn't have that available. Maybe because people told you that it wasn't possible for you,
Mhm.
or maybe even that, as a kid, you were not good at these sports,
Yes.
and there is this desire to prove yourself.
I don't know if it's so much that, but I think like yeah, I sucked at sports. I was that kid that was like picked next to last by the team coaches. It was mortifying. It did nothing for my self-confidence, which was already pretty shattered. But once I first slithered my hips into a sea kayak, that's when I realized it's like, and I wouldn't say I immediately excelled at it, but I took to it pretty quickly. I had really good balance. And then that's when I realized I have, this endurance. I am just wired, this point to point perspective of just, going, going, and going. And so it's not so much that I have something to prove, but it's just, I finally found my thing, like my passion, something that I could actually do and I could do it well. And then I could share it with others. And it just grew into this thing where now I'm mentoring. I take great joy in mentoring younger people to have very similar experiences. Case in point, right now there is a young German woman. She's 32, and she purchased one of my sea kayaks from me, the one that I took on the 2022 expedition. So the joke is it knows the way, and she is paddling Inside Passage. She is probably 3 to 4 weeks out from Skagway, from the finish line. So she's making really good progress. I've been mentoring her from the get go. Yeah, it it warms my heart, and it just makes me feel like it's another way of me giving back, of paying it forward. So
Just the same way you were inspired by Aubrey,
Audrey, yes.
you are passing on the baton.
Yes, exactly. I love that.
For those of us who have, let's say, never been on a sea kayak, I feel I've been fortunate. I have tasted the joy. I went to grad school in Florida, and I had some beautiful kayak trips, including like a kayak packing trip
Nice.
down in the Keys.
Right.
Nothing like Alaska,
Warm
but
water though.
it was it was beautiful for me back then, and camping
Mhm.
on like those atolls, and then waking up and jumping in the water again, like the places it takes you,
Yes.
right? You cannot get to those places otherwise. For those listening who haven't considered kayaking
Mhm.
as an escape, as recreation, why should people try it?
Why should people try it? Um, I think, as you just so eloquently explained, it can take you to places where so many other people cannot go, right? The kayaks, all they need is like a foot of water. It's referred to as draft. And so the bigger boats can't go there, even some of the smaller boats, the little nooks and crannies. And that's one thing that I love about the sport of kayaking. I refer to it as a layered sport. It could be really anything you want it to be. It can be long distance expedition paddling. It could just be poking around in nooks and crannies, island hopping in warm waters. It could be racing, surfing, um,
It's true.
whitewater kayaking. It's just working on all the fancy maneuvers, the rolls and the rescues, and all those things. It's really whatever you want it to be. And for me, I find it very centering, just very balancing, like literally and figuratively. You know.
Yes, literally and figuratively, indeed. And well, one thing I know that back when went and did some kayaking, we had those bigger boats. We had to load them and strap them on
Mm.
to the top of our cars. But again, technology has come a long way. A couple of years ago, I bought and shipped an Oru inflatable
Mm-hmm.
kayak for a friend of mine, Mohit, who lives in India and who's trying to do some like first descents
Okay.
in the Himalayas. So yeah, you don't need to make space in your overloaded garage for a big kayak. Like you can get like a small kayak that can fit in a backpack.
Yes, the Ormos, they pack up like that, almost like a suitcase.
Exactly.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
like Audrey did with
Yeah.
the inflatable. You could just inflate it
Yes.
and roll it up and stuff it under your
Yes.
armpit and hitchhike is what she did.
Yeah. So I think as an activity, it's way more approachable than people think it is,
Mhm.
and I think anybody can kayak, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm sure you would be the first person to. You don't have to be a huge athlete
not at
to
all.
be
I
able
I
to.
always say minutes to learn, a lifetime to master. Like any sport, really, right?
Does one need to be a great swimmer?
No, actually, conversely, the we always say, and this is more for extreme kayaking, but your swimming ability has zero, nothing to do with your chances of survival if you were to capsize and lose contact with your boat. There's been, if you look at the research and the anthologies of kayaking tragedies, people have drowned. It's usually hypothermia. It's the first thing that's going to get you, just like 20, 30 feet from shore. So it's really
Mm,
more, we always preach wear your life jacket, your PFD, your personal flotation. That's your buddy. And then the first thing that is drilled into you, especially if you start with a whitewater background, if you've capsized, you never, ever, ever, ever let go of your boat and your paddle. It's just drilled. It's like your knee jerk reaction, no matter what the conditions. You flip, you miss your roll. Maybe you don't know how to roll, but rolls fail. I'm here to tell you they fail at the most inopportune times. So you've got your boat, you've got your paddle, you've practiced in real conditions, you know how to get your butt back in that boat, or you know how to rescue somebody else. And that's a big piece of advice I would give people that want to get into the sport is take professional instruction, because these certified coaches will intentionally put you in like controlled scenarios where they'll have you team up and they'll create these scenarios where people will flip. They'll ask you to flip. They'll tell your paddling buddy to intentionally let go of their paddle, let go of their boat, feign a shoulder injury, feign hypothermia, unconsciousness, whatever, all these different scenarios. And you have to be a problem solver. It's like, if this were the real deal, how am I going to, how am I going to fix this? And they're really fun drills to practice. And they're in real water, real like tidal streams or bigger waves or whatever. But it's in an area where the coaches can come in if things go a little sideways. They can call it and put everybody back in a nice little tidy bunch. So I've learned so much. Even as an advanced paddler, I still continue to take these coaching scenarios to keep those skills refined, because so many things can go wrong and go wrong so quickly. So it just needs to be like a knee jerk reaction. But for the most part, it's like going back to this magic carpet ride. It's just, you know, paddling along and letting the scenery go by, seeing the occasional whale and hopefully no bears when you're on shore, and just having this magical experience. And it's, you know, from a aging perspective, it's what's that? It's lower impact. Like I really don't whitewater kayak anymore because the capsizing can be really, you know, jarring on your body. So yeah, I think sea kayaking for the most part is just gentler on the body. It's a slower pace if you want it to be, and yeah, it's a lovely adventure package.
And yes, if you want to kayak the Inside Passage or do something equally serious, yes, there are probably a lot of like stepping stones.
Mhm.
But to simply get like a sit on top kayak
Mhm.
and go and paddle
Oh
around
yeah.
in your local
Yep.
lake, you can probably do that even without advanced
Oh,
instruction. You know,
sure.
have your PFD on you, and you can still be out there in the middle of a lake, and it's beautiful. Like it doesn't have to, even if you don't see orcas, just seeing like the beauty.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, kayaking is awesome. Moving on. So you know, yes, this is the Ageless Athlete podcast, and what has this lifestyle and maybe these long solo journeys, what has that taught you about staying ageless?
What has it taught me about staying aged? I think just following your passion, right? Just doing something that you just love and you feel like it's giving you something and it helps you give others something. That's what keeps me young at heart. And it's like when I look in the mirror and I'm like, oh God, this aging thing is happening, right? Some days are worse than others. I remind myself that like not everybody gets to age, right? Like aging is a privilege. Like we've all lost people close to us who have died, you know, much too young, right? And so you getting older is a privilege, and so that reinstates my belief is the wrong word, but just my desire to want to keep doing what I'm doing. Maybe um, it's not the intensity is definitely being taken down a notch, but you know, just it's so important to treat your body like it's the only one you have because right it is the only one you have. So you know,
Yeah.
taking care of yourself and eating right and exercising and getting out in nature and all of that stuff that is just driven home. That point has been driven home to me over and over and over because of all the time that I've spent out there.
Susan, I'm guessing that if somebody had asked you this question when you finished the first crossing at 49, if you were going to do this again at like a dozen years later, I am guessing you might have said no. So now you have done this, maybe even surprised yourself a second time.
Mhm.
So I'm just wondering, what is it about your life a dozen years from now that you don't think is possible when you look into the future?
Hmm. 12 years into the future.
And where you might surprise yourself again.
Yeah. So then I would be 76, 12 years into the future. Um, yeah, I see myself as still paddling, you know, and I remind myself that Audrey was, I had this image of her holding up this map, and she was 76 at the time, and it was a fold out map of the Inside Passage. And she had inked in all the routes that she had paddled to date. Like, so drew in with a Sharpie, like everything she paddled around islands. She circumnavigated the Inside Passage multiple times. You know, she wasn't a linear paddle so much like me. She just explored all these different areas. And I'd always say she was only 76 when that photo was taken. And she still had about another decade of paddling to do before she laid her paddle down for good. And that's what I aspire to. I don't know if I have her genetics, um, but that's something that I definitely aspire to. But, you know, if it's not paddling, it's going to be something else, whether it's cycling, starting to get into the e-bike scene and doing long distance e-biking. Um, yeah, hiking, skiing, just being outdoors, I think, and writing and inspiring others to do the same.
Well, talking of writing, again, Inside is a, a marvelous book.
Thank you.
I encourage everybody listening to find a copy. Where is the best place for people listening to go find Inside
Mhm.
and maybe the other books that you've written in a way that benefits you or your causes
Mhm.
the most?
Yeah, well, the best way is just to go to my website, susanmarieconrad.com, and there's a real obvious book link on the website, and from there you can order directly on my website. From my website, from comes right here from my office. I'll mail it out. There's a in the checkout pane. There's a little area where you can put a note, like if you want me to inscribe it to anybody specific, um, and so I have the memoir, the adventure memoir from the first trip. I'm working on the book about this more recent trip. That's still a work in progress. But my COVID project was I created a kids book that is adapted from that true story. And so it's also
Ah,
available on my website. And then I recently came out with an Inside Passage photo essay book. So it's called Wildly Inside, a visual journey through the Inside Passage. And that was my ploy to get some of I took like, I don't know, 5,000 images and videos on both expeditions. And I share like maybe 100 in my slideshows, and there's maybe a dozen in the memoir. So this was my way to get some of those out of my computer and out into the world. So it's a beautiful photo essay book of the Inside Passage. It goes by the ecosystems, just like I piloted the Sailor Sea, the Great Bear Rainforest, and then coastal Southeast Alaska, with just some fun facts and enough verbiage. And $1 of every book sale goes to support Pacific Wild. So that's really important too. So yeah. And then also you can ask your local bookstore to stock them. I always encourage people to shop locally. It's available on Amazon. The memoir is. The other two books are not, just the memoir. So your library, your local library, Kindle, it's available on Kindle.
beautiful. Yes. Not only do you write evocatively, you also take just really nice pictures.
Thank you.
We will make sure to put links to your website where people can learn more about the work you're doing and also your books and your photos on the show notes. Any parting words you want to leave us with?
Mm. Any parting words? Just, get out there and do that thing. Do the thing that gives you joy, right? You'll either find a way or you'll find an excuse, is what I always say. So find a way.
Yes.
Find a way.
I can't think of a better person to say those words. Do that thing, because Susan, you went and you did that thing, and you did that thing twice, and you keep doing it day in, day out. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Mm. Oceans of gratitude for having me, Kush. Thank you.
That's it, folks. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Ageless Athlete Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this show just as much as I enjoyed creating and producing it. Whether you are an athlete looking to push your limits or someone striving to maintain a healthy, active lifestyle as you age, there is always something new to learn. From Asia's Athlete, we bring you a fresh episode each and every week. If you liked what you heard, we would love it if you would take a moment to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an update. And if you really liked what you heard, please leave us a review. Crush those 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. It helps us reach more people who are passionate about staying strong and resilient, no matter the age. Don't forget to visit our website and leave your email so I can send you occasional insights, stories, and tips to keep you inspired and motivated on your journey. You can also follow us on Instagram at Ageless Athlete Podcast and on YouTube at Ageless Athlete Podcast as well for even more great content. All of these links are available on the show notes for this episode. This show is entirely produced by me, Kush Khandelwal, based out of California with the help of my trusted adventure pup Roger. Until next time, keep challenging yourself. Keep pushing those limits. Stay mentally and physically fit. Continue doing what you love to do. And my friends, stay ageless.